There is a chapter in the Bible that most preachers skip. Not because it is confusing, not because it is difficult to understand, because it is too clear. Because when you read it carefully, it does not just describe people who lived 2,000 years ago. It describes people who are alive today, people who stand behind pulpits, people who sit in the front rows, people who know every word of Scripture and have built their entire identity around being seen as holy. And the man speaking in this chapter is not a prophet calling down fire from heaven. He is not an apostle warning about the last days. It is Jesus. The same Jesus who said, "Blessed are the meek." The same Jesus who told his disciples to turn the other cheek. The same Jesus who wept at the tomb of his friend and welcomed children onto his lap. That Jesus stands up in the most public place, in the most sacred city in the world, looks directly at the most powerful religious leaders of his generation, and says things so sharp, so devastating, so unrelenting that the crowd goes completely silent. He calls them hypocrites 7 times. He calls them blind guides twice. He compares them to whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, full of dead bones on the inside. And then, when it is over, he walks out of the temple and never goes back. This is Matthew chapter 23. And the reason no one talks about it is because the people it describes are not the obvious sinners. They are not the murderers or the thieves or the openly immoral. They are the religious ones. They are the ones who pray the longest prayers, who fast the most days, who wear the most visible symbols of devotion, who know the law better than anyone and teach it from the highest platforms. And Jesus looks at all of that, everything the world calls impressive, and he says, it is not enough. It is worse than not enough. It has become a trap. To understand why Jesus said what he said in Matthew 23, you have to understand what had been building for 3 years. From the moment Jesus began his public ministry, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law watched him, not with curiosity, with suspicion. Every miracle he performed, they questioned. Every sermon he preached, they challenged. Every time he healed someone on the Sabbath, they accused him of breaking the law. Every time he ate with sinners, they demanded an explanation. They sent delegations to test him. They set verbal traps, hoping to catch him in a statement that could be used against him. They questioned his authority, his lineage, his right to teach. And Jesus had answered every single trap, perfectly, without flinching. He had answered the question about taxes, the question about the resurrection, the question about the greatest commandment. Each time they walked away silenced. Matthew tells us that after the last question, no one dared to ask him anything more. And then Jesus did something unexpected. He stopped answering, and he started speaking, not to them, to the crowds, and to his disciples. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. That is the opening, and it sets up everything that follows. Jesus is not telling the people to reject the law. He is not telling them that the scriptures are invalid. He is drawing a precise, surgical line between the truth being taught and the lives of the people teaching it. The message can be right. The messenger can be corrupt. And when the messenger is corrupt, the message becomes a weapon. Not a weapon for the people, a weapon against them. Jesus gives the first diagnosis. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Picture it literally. A man comes to the temple carrying a burden. He has questions about how to live faithfully. He wants to honor God. He comes to the teachers for help, and instead of lightening his load, they add to it, rule after rule, tradition after tradition, interpretation layered on interpretation, until the simple act of loving God has become an exhausting, complicated, shame-filled performance that ordinary people can barely sustain. And the men who invented the rules, the men who added the layers, They are not carrying any of it. They have found the loopholes. They have memorized which rules can be cleverly circumvented. They know exactly how much they need to appear faithful without actually being inconvenienced by it. They have turned the grace of God into a weight pressing down on the shoulders of people who just wanted to know God. Jesus says this out loud, in front of everyone, because the people carrying those burdens needed to hear from someone in authority that the weight was not God's design, that God did not intend for his presence to feel like suffocation. "Come to me," Jesus had said earlier, "all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The contrast is not accidental. The Pharisees put weight on. Jesus takes it off. The Pharisees add requirements. Jesus fulfills them. The Pharisees make God harder to reach. Jesus tears the veil in two. Then Jesus identifies the engine behind all of it. Everything they do is done for people to see. This is the root. This is where the corruption begins, not in the actions themselves. The actions can be entirely correct. They can fast the right number of days. They can pray the right number of times. They can give exactly the right percentage. But the question Jesus asks about every religious act is not, "Did you do it?" The question is, "Why?" And the Pharisees had quietly, gradually, perhaps without even fully realizing it, shifted the answer to that question. They no longer did these things for God. They did them for the crowd. Jesus gives 3 examples. Their phylacteries, the small leather boxes containing scripture that devout Jews wore on their arms and foreheads, were made extra wide, bigger than everyone else's, more visible, more impressive. The tassels on their garments, meant to remind them of God's commandments, were made extra long, so that everyone who passed them could see how seriously they took their devotion. And they loved the places of honor at banquets, the most important seats in the synagogues, the greetings in the marketplaces, the title of rabbi. Every single one of these things, the phylacteries, the tassels, the seats, the titles, every one of them is designed to make other people look at you and think, "There goes a holy man." And Jesus names it for what it is. Performance, not worship, not devotion, not faith, a show. And a show for the crowd is not a gift to God. It is a theft from him. Because the act that should have gone upward into the presence of the Father has been redirected sideways into the approval of other people. And once that switch has been made, the soul begins to hollow out, because approval from people is not sustainable. It has to be earned again and again. Yesterday's impressive fast is forgotten today. Last week's public prayer has already faded. The crowd moves on. And so the performer has to escalate. Wider phylacteries, longer tassels, better seat, bigger title, until the entire life has become a stage production, and the person at the center of it has forgotten what it ever felt like to simply be loved by God without an audience watching. Now Jesus turns to the 7 woes. In the Old Testament, prophets pronounced woes over nations, over kings, over cities that had turned away from God. It was the language of coming judgment, of divine grief, turned into divine warning. Jesus uses it here 7 times in a row. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites." 7 times. The word hypocrite comes from the Greek theatre. It described an actor wearing a mask, someone playing a character that was not their real self, someone whose face the audience saw was not their actual face. Jesus is not using this word as a casual insult. He is making a precise theological claim. These men have been wearing masks for so long that they may have forgotten they have masks on. The performance has become the identity. The role has replaced the person. And that, Jesus is saying, is the most spiritually dangerous condition a human being can be in. Not open rebellion, not obvious sin, not public immorality. Masked devotion. The first woe. You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. This is perhaps the most devastating accusation in the chapter, because these men were supposed to be the gatekeepers of access to God. Their entire function, their entire justification for existing, was to help ordinary people find the way to God, and instead they had become the obstacle. They did not enter themselves because they had replaced genuine faith with performance, and performance cannot open the door to the kingdom. You cannot impress your way in. You cannot debate your way in. You cannot wear your credentials around your forehead and walk through. You enter the kingdom the way a child enters a room, empty-handed, trusting, with no argument to make and nothing to prove. And because they did not enter that way, because they had forgotten what genuine, simple, unguarded trust in God felt like, they could not show anyone else the way. Worse, the system they had built, the requirements they had added, the shame they had attached to ordinary people's failures, all of it was actively blocking the people behind them. A gatekeeper who locks the gate and throws away the key is not a servant of God. He is the enemy of the very people he was called to help. The second woe strikes at something that looks, on the surface, like zeal. You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. These men were missionaries. They crossed oceans. They endured hardship. They were genuinely committed to expanding their movement. But what they were expanding was not the kingdom of God. It was a system of rules and burdens and performance and shame. And when someone genuinely seeking God stumbled into that system and was converted into it, they did not find freedom. They found a more elaborate cage. The convert did not meet the living God. They met a religion about God, a demanding, exhausting, appearance-based religion that doubled their burden and halved their joy. And Jesus says that person is now in a worse condition than they were before, because now they think they have found the truth. Now they think they are on the right road. The cage has a label on it that says freedom, and the convert is too new to know the difference. This is not just a first-century problem. Every generation has its version of it. The Christianity that is more concerned with what you wear to church than whether you know the God you are worshipping. The faith community that is more focused on the statement you sign than on whether anyone in the building has ever felt the love of the Father. The religious system that makes outsiders feel that they must first become a certain kind of person before they are allowed to approach God. That is the second woe. And Jesus does not whisper it. The third, fourth, and fifth woes go after something specific. Oath-taking. The Pharisees had developed an elaborate system of determining which oaths were binding and which could be broken based on what you swore by. If you swore by the temple, that oath was not binding. If you swore by the gold of the temple, it was. It sounds absurd, but it served a very useful function. It gave them a way to make promises without keeping them. The appearance of commitment without the cost of actual faithfulness. Jesus takes this apart methodically. The gold is sacred because of the temple. The temple is sacred because of God. Every oath, no matter how cleverly worded, invokes the name and character of God. There is no loophole. There is no technicality. Every word you speak is spoken before the one who sees everything. And the attempt to find a version of commitment that costs you nothing while looking like it costs you everything, that is not wisdom. That is deception with religious language wrapped around it. The sixth woe reaches into the most carefully constructed pillar of Pharisaic identity, tithing. You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. These men tithed everything, not just their income, their herb gardens, their spice racks. They counted out leaves of mint and measured sprigs of dill to make absolutely certain that exactly 10% went to God. And Jesus does not say that was wrong. He says, You should have done this without neglecting the other. What is the other? Justice, mercy, faithfulness, the parts of the law that cannot be easily measured, the parts that require you to look at the person in front of you and choose them over your own comfort, the parts that do not have a visible, countable, demonstrable output. You cannot photograph your mercy. You cannot display your faithfulness in the marketplace. You cannot make your justice into a wider phylactery. And so the Pharisees had quietly, systematically deprioritized the things they could not show off. They kept the rules that were visible. They neglected the ones that required a changed heart. Jesus uses a phrase here that deserves its own moment. You strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. In Jewish dietary law, both gnats and camels were unclean. You could not eat either one. The Pharisees had become so focused on the tiniest possible infractions, the microscopic violations, the barely visible specks of impurity, that they were filtering their water through cloth to catch a gnat while an entire camel had walked down their throats without them noticing. The camel is the injustice. The camel is the hardness of heart toward the poor. The camel is the contempt for ordinary people. The camel is the corruption of power and the worship of position. Small rules followed perfectly, large ones swallowed whole. The seventh woe is the most haunting. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous, and you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. This is the most self-deceived statement in the chapter. These men honored the dead prophets. They built elaborate tombs for them. They venerated their memory. They claimed solidarity with them. And they were completely blind to the fact that they were doing to Jesus exactly what their ancestors had done to the prophets. They were watching the living voice of God speak in front of them and plotting how to kill him. The prophets were dangerous when they were alive. Dangerous because they said true things that made powerful people uncomfortable. Dangerous because they named the corruption that powerful people needed the masses to ignore. And so the powerful people killed them. And then, when they were safely dead, the next generation built tombs for them. Because a dead prophet is no longer dangerous. A dead prophet can be honored without being obeyed. A dead prophet can be quoted without being followed. A dead prophet can become a mascot for the very system he spent his life opposing. Jesus names this dynamic out loud. You are the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead then, and complete what your ancestors started. He knows what is coming. He knows that within days, his own tomb will be the site of the greatest miracle in human history. And the men who will build it are standing in front of him right now. Then Jesus stops. The anger, if it was anger, gives way to something else. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. This is not judgment. This is grief. The same voice that just pronounced 7 woes now breaks open with longing. A hen and her chicks, not a warrior, not a king, not a judge on a throne, a mother bird spreading her wings over her young, trying to pull them close, trying to protect them from what is coming, and the chicks running away. This is the heart beneath the woes. Jesus was not condemning these men because he hated them. He was warning them because the road they were on ended in darkness, and he could see the darkness and they could not. Every woe was not a curse. It was a cry. Come back, stop performing, take off the mask, let me gather you. And they were not willing. He closes with a prophecy. Look, your house is left to you desolate, for I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And then he walked out of the temple. For the last time, his disciples came to show him the temple buildings. They were magnificent. Herod had spent decades building them. They were the pride of the nation. Jesus looked at them and said, Do you see all these things? Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. 40 years later, the Roman army under General Titus surrounded Jerusalem. They broke through the walls. They burned the city. They tore down the temple stone by stone. Not one stone was left on another. The most dangerous chapter in the Bible ends not with punishment, but with prophecy. Not with God angry, but with God grieving. Not with the door slammed shut, but with an open invitation still standing. You will not see me again until you say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." The door is not closed. It is open. It has always been open. But it requires something. Not wider phylacteries, not longer tassels, not the best seat in the synagogue. Just this. A soul willing to say, without performance, without an audience, without a title to protect or a reputation to maintain, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Matthew 23 is dangerous because it does not let you point outward. Every other danger passage in the Bible can be aimed away from yourself. The book of Revelation is about the Antichrist. The warnings about sexual immorality are for the obviously immoral. The cautions about violence are for the violent. But Matthew 23 is aimed directly at the religious, at the people who know the Bible best, at the people who pray the most publicly, at the people whose entire identity is built around being seen as spiritually serious. And that means it is aimed, at least in part, at everyone who is watching a video about the Bible right now, including the person making it. The question Matthew 23 leaves you with is not, "Am I religious enough?" It is, "Am I real?" Is my faith a conversation with God or a performance for people? Do I pray because I need God or because I want to be seen praying? Do I fast to quiet my soul or to announce that I am the kind of person who fasts? Do I give because I love or because I want the acknowledgement? Do I serve the poor genuinely or do I make sure someone notices? These are not comfortable questions. But Jesus asked them in the most public setting of his ministry, in the most sacred city in the world, with the cross days away and eternity in the balance. Because the most dangerous spiritual condition is not rebellion. It is performance mistaken for devotion. It is the mask worn so long that the wearer has forgotten their own face. It is the religious life that looks exactly right from the outside and is completely hollow on the inside. A whitewashed tomb. But here is what Matthew 23 does not say. It does not say that God is done with the religious. It does not say that your past performance disqualifies you from genuine relationship. It does not say that the mask cannot be removed. It says, "Come back." How often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. That longing did not end when Jesus walked out of the temple. It ended on a cross outside the city walls, where the one who pronounced the woes absorbed the judgment that those woes deserved, so that the people inside the woes could walk free. The Pharisees built tombs for the prophets. God built a resurrection for his Son. And in that resurrection, every mask can come off. Every performance can stop. Every exhausting, endless cycle of earning approval can finally, permanently end. Because the approval was never the point. The relationship was the point. It has always been the point. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Not a wider phylactery. Rest. That is what the most dangerous chapter in the Bible is ultimately about. Not judgment, an invitation.